No mai hoki mai, welcome back everybody. Friday, still quite chilly. Really excited to see everybody again. Lovely that we can spend this last morning of the week together. So welcome back and thanks again. I know everybody's juggling lots of things and having to do lots of prioritizing and like calming yourself to fit all the bits in and be here. So really appreciate your time and the face-to-face time that we get to have together. So thank you. So I'll just, we've got Desna Whangasholem joining us this morning, and Desna will introduce herself and walk us through her kōrero in a little bit. Some of you got to meet Desna in the first session, and so we'll be definitely hearing some more from her shortly, but we'll just do a bit of a landing, a bit of a check-in, and remind ourselves where we're up to, remind myself where we're up to, before we get into a bit more of that. So let me just do the bringing up the slides. Yeah, so we're nearly 2/3 of the way through, and just wanting to locate us in the first couple of modules was really around how we work and principles and values and kind of locating ourselves into that bigger picture. With this second module going into ways of making and ways of working that try and lean us towards rebalancing in big and small ways. So that shift from transactional ways of working to transformation and what that might look and feel like. And Desna's in particular going to help us connect into the role of place and whenua in some of that work. And then the module C is kind of like, well, so what does this mean maybe for how we track things and how we think about what we pay attention to, and some ways of thinking about evidence and outcomes in the context of systems change. And one of the key things that I just want to sort of make note of in the rhythm and the way that we've constructed this sessions, because it's a lot of time and it's a tiny amount of time together. In many ways, it's quite long in the sense that it's over 6 or 7 weeks, which I know makes it harder for people, but it's fits into kind of a pace of integrating with your work. But we've been quite intentional about Thursdays being sort of some what and content and grappling with things, and really wanting to make room, particularly on Fridays, for hearing from our learning partners and tangata whenua practitioners from Aotearoa who are doing this work in different ways and transformative work in different ways. So tōkona te raki last Friday, and the idea of the Friday sessions is to really hear their stories and just sit with that and know more about what's going on and what people are doing. Although actually tōkona te raki worked us pretty hard last Friday, I think, and we'll try and make this a little bit more spacious in that sense. But here, so today hearing from Desna and the work with Ngā Aho, and then similarly the last session on the last clinic in module C, we'll be working with Debbie Goodwin from Tuakana Taina, Kaupapa Māori Evaluation Collective. So there's a real intentionality in this time that we have together for us to be able to connect into different practices that are already happening in Aotearoa, rather than needing to, there's lots of awesome stuff overseas, and we've put links in our links list that we'll resend out and things, and really great to acknowledge all that work, but really wanting to make space in this foundations program for the work that's actually already happening here and the connections that we can make across teams. So really hoping that in the breakout sessions, you're also finding opportunities to connect with each other and build some of your own networks and connections and conversations that you can take beyond these little bits of time together. And we certainly saw that with last year's cohort, and I know that group would be really keen to connect with this group, so we'll create some opportunities, and if people want to take that up, you'll be able to do that. So just thinking what we want to do as we did yesterday, check in with how everybody's going, where are people at today, a little Friday morning check-in. So our Slido link is in the chat, and really love to hear how people are traveling on this particular day at this particular time. So how is your waka today, e te whānau? Okay, so I think there's 2 links in the chat, but it's the second link, second Slido link. So how is your waka today? So make sure that that's the question that you can see there. The second link in the chat. Cool, so we've got people in all sorts of different stages and spaces. A few people feeling like the water's starting to come in over the edges and they might just need a little someone to slide up next to them perhaps and just steady them, or bring them an extra cup of coffee, or not add one more thing to their plate. So just take what you need from the session that we have this morning and let the rest slide on by. Don't let it be something that's coming in addition to what you've already got going on. Few people feeling great, energized, full of new ideas, recovering from a storm. So people are in a range of different places and spaces. That's cool. So just this practice of landing and just knowing where you're at. And so take from today what you need and what's useful, and then we can always return to it in different ways as becomes useful. So I might just capture the word cloud and put this in our slides as well from the 2 days. Awesome. So to start today, we're just going to have another team recap. So yesterday, Ben and Patrick really kindly just shared back in for us the different worlds. We've got quite a diverse group of agencies on this journey with us. People are working in quite different spaces with different things that they're tackling, although we obviously have a lot of really common threads as well that we're holding on to together. And it's really helpful for us to see into the worlds and windows of others and understand how they're interpreting things. And so yesterday, Ben and Patrick offered that, and this morning, I believe Elsa is going to share with us, kia ora Elsa, thank you so much, a perspective of the mahi that she's working in, the world that she's in, and the connection to some of the conversations and things we've been having here. So I'm going to just stop screen sharing and hand over to you for a few minutes, Elsa, if that's okay. Kia ora.
Yeah, good morning. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Happy Friday, we made it. Yeah, as Penny has said, I'm an advisor within the public service whale. I've gotten really good at doing the little spiel in all of these breakout rooms, so I'll give it a go now. So the public service whale, we're a newly established business unit, which is funded by MVAT, but we're housed here at the Public Service Commission, which used to be called State Services Commission. So although we sit within this central agency, our actual work as a team is focused on the Pacific region. So our role is basically to serve and support public service commissioners across the Pacific region. So we work with 16 countries in the Pacific, and that's, it's really different, it's really exciting. So we're kind of like a development program. So the way that this has been really relevant to our work is it's basically made us kind of check in and kind of called us out a little bit on our processes and making sure that our Pacific partners are still at the centre and driving our work, because our role is literally, like, our vision is like to support them to achieve public service excellence. So supporting them with improving governance, and success is just whatever they say success is for their countries. So this course has been really relevant to us because, it did start with the values and the principles, and although it is kind of centred more around New Zealand's context and Aotearoa and Te Ao Māori, and actually making sure Māori perspectives are front and centre, it's still relevant to us, just, different culturally, but still same kind of values. So for us, we have a team charter. So we've got a team charter because we kind of have the idea that, if you're not even treating each other well as a team, that's probably going to translate through your work and the people at the other end. So with Roimas's awesome kōrero at the start of this course, making sure you're all on the same waka and going the same way. And that second part's probably more important, because a lot of the time we've all got the same values, but it's like, someone thinks integrity is bad and someone else thinks it's bad, and you're all just doing whatever, but you're like, well, they're the same values though. So the interpretation of values has been really important for us, and we've had to really strip that back because we've got a mainly Pacific team, about 14 of us, and although we're all like mostly Pacific, we're not all homogenous. So I'll be like, well, from a Samoan perspective, this is what safe space looks like, and this is what we mean. And it's about the va, which is like the sacred space, and it's relational and time and place, and it's, it kind of determines your your kind of hierarchy, and then there's Tongan, and there's actually more of a structured hierarchy. So it's kind of different interpretations of values, and I think that's something that I didn't think of as much before I did this course. So now it's really kind of called me out and made me have to stop and think. And stopping and thinking has been another thing we talked about as a team, because we're new as a unit, we've been moving really quickly, and we need to take time to stop and reflect. So that's been a big one. So we actually try and check in more and bring our vision out and make sure that's at kind of at the start of every team meeting. But okay, before we start, this is what we said we would be doing. This is what Pacific Partners have asked us to do. What's everyone doing this week? And then it kind of, if you start that way, it kind of makes you think more, okay, I'm not going to be so like down in the weeds of the work now. It's more about the, what do people want? You kind of get, in like little rabbit holes when you're working on stuff. So it really makes you stop and think about people, which is, that's why most people are in the jobs we're in, right? So that's been really important for us. The sharing and shifting of power, that's been a huge learning for us as well. So this course is understanding that you can do that at the start of a process, rather than kind of, we've already thought about the thing we want to do, and then we're like, oh, what do they think about this thing? It's awesome, isn't it? Rather than like going all the way back and just being like, oh, what's happening here? What's the context? What are some problems that you're facing? And really just kind of playing more of a facilitator role for them to come to the conclusion of this is what we need. So that's been interesting. I have tried that out a few times, some of the countries I work with, and it's a lot different, because what I probably would have thought was the solution, talking through it kind of ended up somewhere totally different, and that's a really important one. And the last thing is thinking about our priorities and where they come from, who set them, and basically the boundaries in which we work. I think we're a little bit on the luckier side, because we can keep pointing to the Pacific and saying like, that's our mandate. So we can kind of get out of the politics here domestically. And I think that's something that we're quite privileged in that sense. But we do notice it when we work with other agencies here. So if we try and do something with the Pacific and we want to loop in another agency, suddenly we see all the red tape and everything that we weren't experiencing. So it's really trying to, I guess, kind of take people on the journey with us. So if you get a chance to work with our team, like, I hope that's, that's a really cool learning thing for you as well, and that helps you out of the politics that you might be facing. Because for us, we've really been able to kind of get our gel-free card, with working kind of regionally. But no, this course has been awesome. We're loving it. There are about 3 of us from the whale that are on this course, and we just catch up regularly, like once a week, just to check in and share any reflections. Really sorry this was quite long, but those were just some bullet points from the rest of the team. Cool, but thank you, loving the course. Thanks, Penny, thanks, Brooke.
Kia ora, thanks so much, Elsa. There was heaps in that. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us, and also the, as with everyone that's shared, just being like really generous and open about what's going on, the experiences, and the ways, the different things of not knowing and doing that you've been able to engage with. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I love the checking in, being and saying what is it, where are we heading, as a way to just constantly go from down in the weeds to up, down, that flexibility that we have to build to hold big picture and little. That's a really powerful but simple kind of way of engaging with that. Thank you so much. That was awesome. So just coming back to some of the kōrero from tomorrow to just land us into the group conversation that we're going to have in a second, and picking up on what we just heard from Elsa as well. One of the things, the sort of frames that we played with yesterday, was this transaction to transformation, and people might have different words on the left and the right that they're talking about, but we know that we're trying to get somewhere different. We know we're trying to enable different kinds of outcomes, and we know that we're trying to work in different ways. That's a kind of collective, hopefully in the same direction, movement that we're on. But But what we started to sort of unpack yesterday and hear and touch and feel was actually what are some of the things that we're going to be encountering or needing to pay attention to or be a part of as part of the mahi in this kind of transition to different ways of working. And we know it's things like building trust, building healing. We know the power of social capital, social connections, but we're also starting to see some of the unweaving, the unlearning, the surfacing of barriers, of tensions, trauma, whether it be this structural racism, history, all the sort of things that are sitting under the surface there that are going to be part of this journey that to some extent we have to learn our way into doing. And some groups are miles ahead of us, some groups are, you know, really strong and have been doing this for a long time, and we can learn from that. And some of us are still sort of figuring out, okay, what does this actually mean? We know where we want to get to, but actually how do we do this and how do we build the capacities of that? So these kinds of things that are starting to be part of the work in that transformational shift. And then just this idea of, you know, how we work really matters. That's part of building the capability, and that's part of being able to see change from early on. We don't have to put a long effort in for 18 months and then hope that change pops out at the end. We're actually engaged in that enabling process all the way through, and that we can be working to shift the system, shift ourselves while we're kind of working on the bigger shifts as well. And we saw that, you know, sort of picking up in people's kōrero that was coming out of the breakout. So this is in the slides for you to look at later if you want to. I'm just going to pick out a couple of things that came up in the chat yesterday. And one of the, this idea of actually in many cases, communities, iwi, hapu, maybe they already know what they want to do, and it's sort of governments organising itself to catch up. You know, we're having to figure out, well, how do we configure ourselves to support that? The challenge of managing BAU whilst also trying to change work. And so we're sort of working on parallel tracks at the same time. And people talked about needing to be translators between, you know, concepts of accountability and actually the reality on the ground. Definitely about making space and time. And to the point that Elsa just made, someone talked about the toilet analogy and needing to look after our own people and unlock internal toilet doors as well. I thought that was powerful. A metaphor that will definitely catch people's attention. That thing of building capacity as we go. And so is it Tavis or Tavis shared a whakatauki that talks to that. So those who build the house are also built by the house, to kind of capture the some of the whakaaro that we had yesterday, and acknowledging the storm and different tohu, but also this thing of that there's fellow travelers, you know, people are on this journey feeling the same thing, and we can see that when we look at where people's waka is at, you know. So it's really nice to be able to connect them with other people who are both energized, but also feeling the overwhelm of what it means to be in all this and in the storm and stuff. So just wanting to mihi to everyone for sharing and the connections and space that we're able to create together in this little forum. There was also quite a few questions, and again, I'm not going to call them out all out, but they're here if you want to go back and have a look at what different people are sitting with. But just a couple of that I just wanted to thread into around this idea of smaller changes that are happening incrementally, as well as working for the big transform and the steps that we need to take, you know, to get to that destination, and how we can hold that and having that big goal, but also working on the things that actually prepare us to be ready to do that work and to work in different ways. So there's kind of small steps, making small changes. And so I just wanted to use that to lean into almost like a question for the group. So this is to set us up for having a bit of a conversation with each other just now in the smaller groups, just thinking about that transactions transformation, potentially thinking about what stood out from yesterday. But the question is, well, when we're making change, when we're trying to do, you know, the mahi, what is it that we might see and feel in ourselves and in others in the system? What are the kinds of things that you're observing through that change process that you actually need to engage with? What are the things that are showing up? And as a sort of provocation, where is that in our idea of evidence now? When we're thinking about working in evidence-informed ways, where are these things that we think are showing up and that we're starting to name? Are they there? Have we got the capacity to talk about them? So those are your sort of provoking questions to take into your breakout group. Now, as always, if you haven't met each other yet, you'll start to see familiar faces, I imagine now, but if there are people in there that you haven't connected with, please take the time to introduce yourselves first. And we'll just have a few minutes, this idea of when you're making change, what might we see or feel? And does that connect to how we think about evidence at the moment? Kia ora, and kia ora. I know there's a few folks that joined us a little bit late this morning, so welcome everybody. So just take a minute to drop a couple of thoughts in the slide from, in the chat from your conversation now. So just really interested to see a little bit of a flavour of the kind of things that were interesting, exciting in the conversation, or that you enjoyed sharing. So we'll just take a minute to drop a few things into the comments so we can kind of connect across the different korero that was happening then. Still a few comments getting dropped in there. If you have a chance, just have a little look at what people have been talking about. So the power of storytelling, not just hard data, exploring how we apply what we're learning when the main interface is with community organisations, not with whānau. So that's a great conversation to be having. About measuring, so I'm excited that we'll come back to measuring and outcomes impact in module C around what we're learning and how we actually track some of those things differently, and how this idea of if it's different, it should look and feel different. So this is one of the things that I think we've really started to notice and see, is that to get different outcomes, we've got to start in different places, and that actually should be visibly noticeable. And in a way, it's an oversimplification of something quite complex. But if we stop and think, oh, you know what, we're doing the same things we've always done, we'll probably end up in the same place. So I think that thing of like, yeah, what are we trying that's a little bit different? What are we shifting even just a little bit so that we're likely to be heading in a slightly different direction? I think it's simple, but it's actually quite a powerful sort of little heuristic or rule of thumb just to think about, yeah, we should be seeing, if like the spot the difference, you know, those cartoons where you have to look and see the difference between two pictures, we should be able to see some differences in our picture if we're genuinely trying to get to different places and work in different ways. So some awesome reflections in there, thank you. We'll do the same thing where we draw those out and sort of summarize and capture so people can see a record of what sort of sense making different groups are doing around this work and where they're up to. So I'm just about to hand over in a minute to Desna, and I just want to firstly mihi to Desna for joining us and sharing her whakaaro and taking the time to walk us through her work and the long dedicated work of Ngā Aho and the different practitioners and stories behind that. And I'm just offering people that framing for this rest of the session for thinking about the role of place and whenua in our work. So it can be a background kind of reflection and thought. And we keep coming back to this, and it's coming up more and more in the conversation about, well, what is it that we need to pay attention to? What is of value in this change-making work and this work around equity and intergenerational wellbeing? So those are just sort of some background thoughts to hold. As Desna's talking, feel free to drop questions partai in the chat, and if there's time to and it makes sense to, we'll try and weave those into the conversation as well. So I'm just going to hand over ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Desna, to you, and let Desna introduce herself and take us through some kōrero from her world and her perspective and learning, and then we'll have some time to unpack that in a couple of different ways as a group. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and hand over to you, Desna. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui. Ko rongo mai wahine me kakamunu me ngā te pāhau wira ngā iwi ko ngā tahu matawhaiti tōku hapu no mahia ahau, ko taiporutu tōku kāinga tūturu, ko taiporutu tōku whenua, tōku moana, tōku awa. Yeah, so ko Desna Whanga Sean tōku ingoa. I'm the chairperson for Ngā Aho, the Māori Designers Network of, well actually Māori and Indigenous Designers Network these days. We've got around about, I think, sort of 200 members that are part of our rōpū. Yeah, and we started off, I think sort of 2006 or so we were incorporated. At the time we were sort of thinking about the fact that, you know, a lot of New Zealand at that time was understood as, you know, like Captain Cook kind of dropped off the end of the world and landed in New Zealand. And we spend a hell of a lot of our times trying to look at ways that we can reinscribe our sense of place into our landscape. I know I've heard this morning that there's a little bit of a discussion about how do we sit in relationship to the treaty. And I mean, at the time that we formed Ngā Aho, and I guess my childhood, a lot of the discussion was around biculturalism, and I think it was somewhat a misnomer in that people felt that there could only be two cultures. And so the way that we've positioned ourselves with Ngā Aho is to look at the have all of our work guided by the treaty. So the concept of diversity, both in terms of cultural representation and diversity of thought, is really visible in all across Aotearoa at the moment, across governance and industry and policy. And I think that it's really good to keep in mind within Aotearoa, our place, we approach this kaupapa from a treaty platform. For this place, the treaty is our guiding platform of sovereign knowledge systems. So working in partnership, everybody has a place within the treaty. So tangata whenua, so the people of this place work in partnership here with tangata tiriti, which encompasses everybody else that lives here. And that's kind of a generic term to describe the people whose rights to live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, derive from te tiriti and the arrangements that the Crown has established under a common rule of law and the equity of provisions of Article 3 of the treaty. Forgive me while I have technical issues as per usual. Yeah, so today I'd like to share how collective practice and identity as Indigenous or Māori designers has been woven and supported by Ngā Aho. It's a network, as I said earlier, of Māori Indigenous design practitioners. We were formalised as an entity in around about 2005, 2006, although that was preceded by a hui at Hoani Waititi in 2001 with a collective of Māori architects, landscape architects, designers, kaitiaki, planners, pretty much everybody across the built environment, and that includes those with alphabet soup after their name and those that don't have that. When we formalised in 2005 and 6, that was in response to urban design protocol released by the Ministry for the Environment, which failed to meaningfully engage with Māori aspirations and our interest in the built environment. So our network of Māori design professionals is largely but not exclusively involved in the built environment. And over those years, we've continued to champion Māori design and Māori design practitioners and be an advocate for all of our people and are connected to the environment. So we aim to apply our design skills to achieve Māori aspirations in designing and realising a future Aotearoa. Ngā Aho translates the many strands, communicating a concept of bringing together the many strands of the Māori design world. Ngā Aho uses our Indigenous creativity for outcomes that are regenerative and enduring and born of an intimate knowledge of place and people and the connected practice in between. We acknowledge our embeddedness in natural systems. So as tangata whenua, we don't separate ourselves from nature, and we see nature as a very intelligent being. Our value chain, therefore, and measures are about the well-being of our peoples in unison with the environment. We put forward the proposition that bringing the Indigenous to the fore means designing concepts, and products, frameworks, and ways of doing which have long-term, intergenerational, meaningful outcomes for both our environments and our communities. Within our Western reality, we kind of have a chronophobia, which inhibits our thinking to think relationally. So it defutures our spaces and erases our histories and her stories, and it's a driving character of modernity and capitalism. The constant state of urgency inhibits our ability to be able to think beyond now and our ability to be able to weave our contributions together. So with Ngā Aho, what we've done is created a multidisciplinary professional cultural platform which progresses those complex issues which span across economic and social and cultural and ecological concerns. Our value proposition is to reconnect ourselves to place and re-envision our landscapes so we can better see our faces and our places. Our wānanga tau are one of the key ways that we do this. So annually we connect, we're invited to a marae usually by one of our members to visit their home territory, and we gather to hear their stories of place and share our skills for the support of the home people's futures. So during those gatherings, we've got students, design professionals, elders, children, learning about the issues that the home people are facing with the environment, and we dissolve those lines in between the stakeholders and design professionals. Those issues could be anything like wharenui restoration, water table levels, cultural narrative expressions within the built environment, education programs. So yeah, quite a wide variety of opportunities and needs which are offered from the iwi and the hapu or the hokainga or the home people in terms of what's real for them. During those sort of usually 3 to 4 days, we'd run some workshops on site about how we apply our interdisciplinary and intergenerational skills to the needs of the home people. And we usually hikoi to cultural sites of significance and visit local studios of Māori design and creative practitioners in the area. During that time, we try to think about what the current and future state scenarios are for those people and weigh up the different options that we've got. We prototype, we draw, make playful processes and safe spaces to build people's confidence and capability to collaborate. It's been really valuable, particularly for the tauira, because it helps us to better understand what might be needed from our people from the ground and how we make our design skills, I guess, meaningful within the cultural community context. And within that, we give back any design concepts that are produced during those gatherings to the hosting hapu. The gatherings nurture intergenerational, interdisciplinary, diverse community collaboration, and they bring immediate insights and responses which are grounded in the realities of our peoples who keep the home fires burning. So with those processes, like one of the key values that we're always upholding is whakawhanaungatanga. We've created a safe space where our practitioner whānau can connect and have the discussions that they need to have to nurture their wellbeing located in identity. And that includes rangatahi who are in the tertiary sector, senior practitioners who are at quite a few different levels of the industry, our kaumātua, our communities, including whānau, hapu and iwi. And many of our practitioners find themselves operating in isolated professional spaces, so places that there's little presence of our faces. So the gatherings that we've had over the years have tended to be quite a nurturing space for our professionals. We've also sought out to strategic partnerships with New Zealand design institutes to bring the Indigenous to their forums. So in this image of Harry Williams, we had a dawn ceremony in Auckland on Wednesday, the 8th of February 2017, where representatives of the New Zealand Institute of Architects in Ngā Aho signed the Te Kawenata Orata, which is a covenant that formalises an ongoing relationship of cooperation between two groups. The Kawenata is a values-based agreement deliberately kept simple so that we can work with 5 articles that set out the relationship between NZIA and Ngā Aho in the spirit of partnership under the mana of the Treaty of Waitangi. The 5 articles refer to respect, so whakaritinga, authority and responsibility, rangatiratanga, knowledge and tikanga, mātaranga, whaihanga, cooperation, mahi kotahitanga and representation, so kanohi kitea. Ngā Aho foundational charter is the Te Aranga Māori Cultural Landscape Strategy. So when this was formed, that was again around the time that the UDP was coming through, recognising that was a lack of clear Māori voice in this space, that Te Aranga Cultural Landscape Strategy was formed through a collective process. That strategy responds to the Treaty of Waitangi by supporting our self-determination for iwi through our identity being recognised as a critical dimension of the built environment. In Tamaki Makaurau, the strategy has been involved into the Te Aranga principles, which are hosted on the Auckland Council's design manual. So in this case, we've used design as a tool to aid development and help achieve better quality urban environments by creating great buildings and spaces and places, but places that are distinctive to Tamaki Makaurau. These designs are driven by local values and approaches, and most importantly by forming relationships with mana whenua and learning about their pūrākau or their histories of place. The reason why this is important to us is more than, I guess, everybody sees design frequently as like the kōrero on the outside of the building, but for us it's about reinscribing our ancestral narratives on the built landscape, and that acknowledges our respect for our place and our ongoing relationship with place. So our human systems cannot live without the protective origin of the ecosystem. As tangata whenua, we understand that the land is the source of our law and our law. And Indigenous visual patterning draws upon the patterns of the environment, when inscribed in our built environment, reminds us on a day-to-day basis about our relationship and responsibility to place. Giving pūrākau, mōtiatia, karakia, wairia, cultural narratives a space in our urban systems is a method of regenerating health and wellbeing for everybody that moves through these places. In 2016, Ngā Aho created the inaugural International Indigenous Design Forum in Whakaparu up north, which we expanded upon in 2018 with Ngāi Tuahuriri and Ngāi Tahu territory, which is the image that you can see here. These events have been part of our reaching out to a broader network to locate our practices within international whanaunga landscapes. They build a platform for Indigenous knowledge to lead and redefine well-functioning civilisation. They connect across the world through Indigenous songlines and a deeper understanding of our place to restore our love of our planet. And we're asking better questions and evaluating Indigenous values. Through these gatherings, we're also progressing ancestral conversations and living cultural practices and resilient knowledge within the design industries. We're establishing an inclusive dialogue between all Indigenous design communities, and we're examining critical questions around cultural appropriation and ownership. We mahi tahi, so collaborate with collective responsibility, accountability and commitment, and from that experience we bring intimate, active and authentic perspective on Te Ao Māori to design leadership. In these forums we also share our knowledge and experiences to collectively grow a more culturally, socially and environmentally equitable world, one that upholds the mana of place. And I think mana is a key concept to hold in our minds at this point. Within Te Ao Māori, the respect of the individual is bound to the relationship and contribution that that person has made to the community and our guardianship of place. The level of respect is indicated through mana, and mana, which can be defined as an identity of authority and prestige, has a number of different dimensions, including the wairoa of our ancestors, the relationship to Māori or the life force of the whenua, the land, and the wairoa of the individual. So if one is to adhere to tikanga or ethics within a community, one must respect and uphold the mana of all of those involved. It's from kaumātua through to rangatahi. Respect is a methodology, it's not a rule. Mā te kōrero ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka marama, mā te marama ka mātou, mā te mātou ka ora ai tātou. Kia ora whānau.
Kia ora, Desna. Ngā mihi nui. I think we just went on like speed train through like 15 years of amazing mahi. So thank you. There was stories and places and people and ways of working, and I'm just going to give everyone a minute just to do a little bit of like processing and sit with the different things that came up, and then we're going to have a conversation about just what surfaces when you hear the knowledge and the ways of working that Desna's sharing with us. If you have questions and you want to follow anything up, drop them in the chat and we'll see if we can come back to it. But it's really just more about listening to that provocation and that sharing and what that might mean in the context of our place in Aotearoa and the work that we're doing. So I'm just going to stop for 30 seconds, no talking, and let us just kind of process for a minute. There's just one thing in there that I want to just restate. There's lots to draw out and people will draw out different things, but the concept of this by moving through spaces, there was healing and well-being. Just there's lots of powerful in there, but the images of the buildings and just that line about just moving through those spaces can be a healing experience. And the Tiaranga principles are a really powerful example of policy. It's almost it's effectively policy for Auckland development that came not through a policy process. It came from practitioners and tangata whenua and an external to government, and has been adopted inside government. I think is a really powerful thing to learn from that, where that came from and how that's been adopted. So if people want to see more about that, we'll share some links around that specifically. And Desna's shared quite a lot of links in our online links, and in the back of this slide deck, there's things that you can follow up and have a look at as well. So just know that there's more you can dip into if you want to. So the invitation now is just to kind of step back from that. These are very generative questions, and that's the point. So from what we've heard just now, but also collectively, what is kind of emerging? What's becoming clearer from your perspective about your mahi or this mahi? So they're very open questions just to see what's coming out, what's starting to kind of crystallize for you. Have that conversation, and as yesterday, you guys did an awesome job yesterday, folks did an awesome job yesterday, just have one person that's able to just take out a few points so that we can say, okay, what's starting to kind of come out and crystallize or emerge from these conversations that we're having and the journeys that people are taking us on. and have someone capture that. So we'll go into breakout group for about 10 minutes, capture that, and then there will be a little break. So we're going to the breakout first, though, just to process and respond to these questions which have been dropped in the chat. So we'll see you again in 10 minutes or so. Kia ora, and thank you again, Desna Tenakwe. Kia ora, I think that's everyone back. Awesome. So some great summaries in there. Thank you very much to the people taking the notes. Okay, so we just have 30 minutes together for the rest of our Friday time. Hopefully you've just managed to get a cup of tea or the thing that you need just to get you through the last little piece of our conversation for this module. There's some really awesome reflections and comments coming out, and again we'll gather them up. We'll give them to you just raw when we send out stuff at the end of today, but we'll also do some synthesizing and kind of theming of the kinds of things that people are naming and seeing as we work through this. And I'm just going to call out one where someone talked about Desna's point around respect isn't a rule, it's a methodology. And so seeing that as a powerful way of reframing something that we have to do intentionally rather than a rule or something that we just say without thinking about actually what does it mean to express that. So kia ora, Desna, and just a mahi again to you for joining us, sharing it in the amazing mahi and journey that Ngā Aho has been on for a long time, and just recognizing that the outcomes and the stories that you shared is, I don't want to say nearly 2 decades, that might be a bit overwhelming, but it's a lot of work, right? It's lifetimes of work, and that's the real. And so just really acknowledging that, and it's awesome to have you as a learning partner in this. So kia ora. Where we want to just go for our kind of last piece of sitting and thinking in this module is almost like a check-in revisit of some of the places that we started in terms of the conversations that we've had and the places that we've gone. And you've had a couple of opportunities in this session to collectively talk to each other, draw some things out, and there's already a lot of kind of knowing that's been produced and captured in the chat from today, which is really awesome, and that kind of collective sense making that people are doing together about what this means for you and your work. And we just want to do that again, but in a slightly different way, and also allow the space for you to do that a bit more individually in this last part of the session. So I'm going to take us back to, or revisit, the 7 things that we shared with you early on that for us help to ground our work and a way of thinking about how do you navigate and kind of land in this fairly complex way of working. And we had 7 things that matter, and I'm just going to take us into the Miro board. When we went in there, and you can revisit this at any time, and we'll resend the link and add more, there's some really useful and powerful commentary and comments about the different concepts, and I just wanted to travel with look at these a little bit with you collectively and just call out some of the things. So anchored in place, for example, we've heard different examples of these 7 things come up in the stories that have been shared with us, and the examples that we've heard of different practice, and so we're seeing them showing up in different ways. And so one of the comments here, thinking about, you know, the entering into places that have really big history and trauma, and how we acknowledge that and how we come into spaces as being a powerful thing about anchored in place. Also culturally grounded. So the idea of making sure, and I've taken out Te Ao Māori to leave it Ao Māori, not expecting Ao Māori to be homogenous. There's not a single Te Ao Māori view, and the dynamics of alienation from culture that has occurred. So the delicate space of navigating that work. Viewing culture as broader than ethnicity. So there's some really powerful sort of comments and unpacking and localizing of this in people's contexts. The other one I wanted to just kind of zoom in on was the idea of the strengths-based practice, and how overwhelming the deficit thinking norms that we have embedded in some of our existing and conventional systems have been. So people are sort of noting that the switch from deficit thinking and actually how significant that is. And I know there's been a lot of work undertaken in recent years to try and shift that, but just acknowledging that we are switching mindsets from something that's been quite embedded in an approach around deficits. And I know someone mentioned early on, for example, you get funding because you write about the deficits. So there's a sort of reinforcing of that narrative. So just recognizing the challenges and tensions and polarities that are in these ways of working. So there's some really powerful comments and commentary, and we invite people to go back at different times and add to that. But what we wanted you to do in this last session is think about these 7 things in the context of your work, and which of these is a useful lens to your mahi and why, and just spend a bit of time thinking about that and thinking what you might want to amplify or what you're kind of unpacking in your work a bit more through these lenses. The way that we've set it up for you to do that is to use Slido. I think that's the simplest way. If Slido is difficult for you and chat is easier, feel free completely to use the chat function instead. But there will be a link in the Slido in a second that will take you to this screen. And so you can click on the magnifying glass and you could get a zoomed up version of the 7 things with a little bit of description under them. And perhaps we would rework this description a bit based on the feedback that the group's given us too, and change these a bit. You can spend a few minutes just looking at this, thinking about them and maybe the comments that you've already made in the Miro board. And then we'd love you to answer the question, which of these is a useful lens for your work and why? So just a few minutes on your own with Radio Buruk in the background, going to this link, just having a look at the 7 things as lenses in your work, and then having a go at answering this question. So which of these is useful to your work and why? So we're just going to build up a bit of a collective picture over the next 5 or 6 minutes. So just letting people take the time to read it, think about it, and process a bit of a response through this. So if you have any trouble with the Slido or the activity, just call out, let us know, and we can help you out. But I will stop screen sharing now so that Buruk can play some sounds for us. The link is in the chat now to Slido. Just call out if anything's not working or doesn't make sense. So again, we will compile some of the feedback and what people are sort of sitting with so that we can share that back and just see. But I want to move now to thinking about in 2 weeks' time when we meet again. So again, thank you. It's just a total privilege to spend this time with you over these Thursday and Friday days. I'm going to try and give you back 10 minutes, especially for those feeling overwhelmed and there's too much going on. So hopefully that just allows you a little bit of time to do something in between now and your next session. But just talking about in between now and the next time we meet. So the focus on module C, that last module, sorry, is really around this idea of learning and how we embed learning into our work and how important that practice is. And some of you are already doing it. Some of you are starting to bring that sort of reflective practice, the spaces for thinking and connecting from everyday action to the bigger picture. And that's awesome. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about embedding some of those learning processes and some of the practices that we've started to experiment with and try and develop in our work around that. And what it means for us to pay attention to different sets of kind of changes and outcomes when we're thinking more systemically and more around the complexity of the shifts than just outputs or some of the more transactional models that we might be used to, and sort of pushing into some of the things that people have raised around, well, who gets to define success? Who says this is good? Where are those definitions of outcomes and criteria coming from? So we will look a bit at that together with the support of Debbie Goodwin, and you'll get, like you did last time, a mail out that has a summary of the slides, and also a little set of prompt tools that if you have time, you could do these in your team groups. You could pick 1 or 2 that you want to try, and of course you can keep doing them afterwards. So one of them, of course, is the reflection tool, which we're always encouraging. But also there's a tool for thinking about what we value and what we track and how we're setting those up now. And so that builds on the evidence tool that we sent out last time to start thinking about how do we think about evidence and whose voice matters and who gets to decide what good evidence looks like. And this is taking that into the space of, so therefore, how do we think about outcomes and what we track and what matters? So there's this a tool to just start thinking and sharing that conversation with your team, and also the prompt cards, which just support the same thing. They try and support a generative discussion with the team around where you're at and where you think you might want to go. There might be changes that you want to make to the cards and tools and make your own set, and we can provide the source files so that people can do that too if you want to kind of adapt them more into your own setting. That's totally what they're there for. So know that we'll be sending some stuff out. Take what you can, apply what you can, and just hold on to it for the future if you don't have capacity to do it now. But we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks for the last module and time together. There is some reading that supports things if you want to go deeper into some of that, and so we'll share that with you as well. But otherwise, I just want to thank again Desna, appreciate everybody's time and the teams that shared. Look forward to hearing from a couple more people next time about the interface between these conversations and the different workplaces that that different folks are in. And just wanting to thank also Lee and Baruch for holding the fort in the technical background for us. So awesome. Thank you again, everybody. An additional 12-minute gift for your morning, which you can use how you like. So I'm just going to invite Baruch to close for us. Thanks, everyone. And look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Be in touch if you have any questions. Kia ora.